The myth of the end of history. How the West mistook victory for stability. For a brief moment in history, the West believed it had won. The fall of the Soviet Union in 1991 was heralded as the ultimate triumph of liberal democracy. Communism had been defeated, totalitarianism had crumbled, the Cold War was over. And some, like political scientist Francis Fukuyama, even suggested that this was the end of history, a moment when Western-style democracy and free markets had won the ideological battle for good. But what if this belief was a dangerous illusion? What if, in its moment of greatest triumph, the West made a fatal miscalculation, believing that victory was permanent, that stability was inevitable, and that its values would remain unchallenged? This is the story of how that false sense of security led to the slow ideological unraveling of the very civilization that thought it had secured its future. The end of history delusion. The idea of the end of history wasn't just about the Cold War ending. It was the belief that there were no more serious ideological threats to liberal democracy. The assumption was that the fall of the USSR proved once and for all that Marxist, authoritarian, and collectivist ideologies had been discredited. Western leaders relaxed. Politicians assumed that free markets and democracy would naturally spread. Universities and cultural institutions, instead of defending core principles, began experimenting with radical ideas, confident that nothing could unseat the liberal order. But history isn't a straight line toward progress. It's a battleground of competing ideas. And just as the West declared ideological victory, the very ideas it thought were dead began mutating, evolving, and re-entering the mainstream under new disguises. The silent resurgence of ideological subversion. While Western governments focused on geopolitics, they ignored a cultural and intellectual insurgency happening within their own institutions. Marxism didn't vanish, it rebranded. The same ideology that once framed history as a class struggle between the bourgeoisie and the proletariat was repackaged into new narratives, oppressor versus oppressed, but now framed around race, gender, and identity rather than economics. Critical theory, a lens that viewed all aspects of Western civilization as systems of oppression that needed dismantling. Postmodernism, a philosophy that rejected objective truth and instead framed everything as a matter of power and perspective. These ideas gained traction not through violent revolution, but through elite institutions, universities, media, corporate culture, and even government agencies. It's why we hear things like a teacher saying, math is racist because it assumes one correct answer. A historian saying, there are no objective facts, only perspectives. A journalist saying, it's not about reporting truth, it's about advocating for justice. These aren't isolated incidents. They are the logical outcome of an ideological shift that took hold while the West was celebrating its so-called victory. The costs of complacency. The consequence? A fragmenting society where the very foundations that made the West successful, reason, free speech, individual rights, and meritocracy, are now being questioned, even rejected. This was never a deliberate conspiracy. It was a game theory failure. Western elites believed they had won and let down their guard. They assumed ideological stability, failing to recognize that ideas don't die just because a regime collapses. The Soviet Union may have fallen, but its ideological offspring took root in the very institutions that shaped the future: education, media, and culture. And now the West finds itself grappling with a crisis it never prepared for: the slow erosion of its own civilization from within. What happens next? History never truly ends. The question is whether we learn from it or whether we repeat the same mistakes. The West's greatest challenge isn't external, it's internal. The belief that liberal democracy and free markets will sustain themselves without active defense is an illusion. Without vigilance, without reaffirming the principles that built Western civilization, history will not bend toward progress, it will bend toward collapse. The end of history was never real. The question is, will we recognize it before it's too late? If you found this insightful, share this message. Let's challenge these ideas and ensure that history isn't rewritten by those who seek to dismantle the foundations of freedom. Like, comment, and subscribe for more deep dives into the battles shaping our world today.